Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. This is episode 4. Peter Vaill and I continue to probe the nature of practice on your behalf. One reason why I'm fascinated with practice, and I think Peter would agree, as we grow practice, practice grows us. What a nice deal, huh? Whatever your practice may be, or mine, as we get better at doing what the practice entails, we learn and we grow. Doing, learning, practice advances, so do we. That's why, and many reasons why, we're interested in what we're going to be thinking and conjecturing about next. Listen in. Well, Peter, we've got a lot more to talk about because we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the nature of practice. Conjecture after conjecture, but there was one we almost talked about the last time. Practice is temporal. And could we start on that one? Because I'm kind of intrigued by what that means. Maybe others will be too.
Well, at a concrete level, one of the, and by the way, hi, David, it's nice to see you again. Talk with you again.
Mm-hmm.
The one that, at a concrete level, the one I was thinking of in particular, and have kind of extended it out to as a conjecture for practice in general. I switched primary care doctors about 3 years ago, and I wish I had a tape of the interview that I had with my present primary care doctor, in which he danced all around the question of whether he should become my primary care doctor. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't make up his mind, and I'm elderly and I've got a whole basket full of problems, most of which aren't ever going to be really solved. And there were a lot of reasons why he would just probably gracefully opt out of the responsibility, but he was supportive and accommodating, and he ended up as my primary care doctor. Well, now that was over 3 years ago. We are the biggest buddies now. We are so casual. We're on a first name basis. We josh around. He's grown a beard. I kid him about that. He kids me about not getting enough sleep, blah, 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 blah. Back and forth. We have the best time with each other. He waltzes into the office. Hi, Pete. How are you doing today? Kind of thing. Nice. And the point is that it has evolved in those 3+ years. And it's something that we both look forward to now. He's got a very large practice. He's in a big clinic, and I'll bet he's got 40 or 50 people on his list. But he remembers my issues specifically without being prompted. He engages me with eye contact, even though he's got a computer screen to worry about. He engages me with eye contact. We have jokes, etc., etc. And the idea that a practice, so much that is said about practice might be snapshots, little case studies of issues that a practitioner faces. But in my mind, we have to remember that practitioner, again, from the practitioner's point of view, remember that quotation we read back in, I think it was podcast number 2, about how other people have me as an object, I have me as a subject, and I know what I mean by my behavior, pretty much. Yeah. And they can't know exactly what my behavior means to me as long as they have me as an object. Well, we have both become subjects to each other is one way to put it. But I'm certainly a subject to him now, and he takes my concerns totally seriously, not as medical problems anymore, but as problems of a friend of his whom he can help. That's the way he looks at it now. And so that every practitioner, I'm sure, can talk about where I was a year ago, where I was 5 years ago, where I am now, where I want to be, with various clients and various issues and subjects, various stages of the learning process. You've already said and emphasized how much practice is continual learning, and which means that to some extent anyway, we're conscious of where we are in our learning process. You're conscious of where you are in your learning process about Zoom and about golf. You're very conscious of both of those stages in your learning process.
It's true.
And both are definitely practices of yours. 3 months ago, Zoom was not a practice. Now it really is.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And same thing with golf. 3 months ago, but maybe 3 years ago.
Definitely. It's only been a little while since I came back to the game with the intention to really enjoy it and enjoy the time that my life offers me.
You seem to be evolving faster on Zoom than you are on golf, but I could be wrong about that.
No, you're right. But I think that the point of this, I love that story about your physician, and it's very heartwarming to know that has occurred, because in that moment when he could have just seen you as a chart or something that he could discount as a number on the chart,
yes,
and that would have been it, and you would have been looking hard to find another. Whatever made that click, and then the combination of your times together to this moment has provided you with tremendous care. And I think we can apply that lesson to a lot of different practices in our lives and other people's lives that keep moving forward, just like ours are right now, as two unrecovered teachers. We just keep teaching. This is the way we're doing it now. So time is temporal. I mean, practice is not temporal. Any further thoughts on that? Because I know some other ones that I'd love to see us discuss today too.
Well, no, I mean, I just wanted to get that into our conversation, the notion that practice is a flow, and it moves along in the minds of both the practitioner and the practitioner's clients.
Mm-hmm.
Our students are not looking at us the same way at the end of the semester as they were on the first day of class, and very, very much our relationships evolve, as we know. So no, I think we've pretty much made our point on that one.
Well, just another quick insert on that. When we're talking about learning, we sometimes think training and educating, formal instruction. The nice thing about practice is that time is the clock on the wall, if you will. And only we don't stop practicing at 12:06 to go on to the next class or to end the workshop. After that formal time is over, the responsibility for using time that we have ahead of us to continue to self-develop, to continue to become more accomplished, is back on the shoulder of the practitioner. Thanks for that thought.
I think we should also just remind ourselves and our listeners that it can go the other way too. I mean, a practitioner can gradually withdraw from a relationship, either with either a community or a group, but also with an individual. And sometimes those withdrawal processes are very awkward and unsatisfying, and other times they are true closure, and people end up feeling pretty good about how the whole thing went and how it ended. So, and of course, some practitioners actually contract for a specific series of meetings or whatever, so that there's an endpoint built right into the relationship, and that's understood by both sides. That's also a pretty common situation, I would think.
I've liked to read biographies and autobiographies from, I think you may do as well. And what
you read a biography is essentially someone now looking back on autobiography and picking up on some of those very transitions that their practice life took them through, to the point when they finally sat down and wrote the whole thing. So practice is autobiographical in nature because we're creating our biography as we go.
You're reminding me that in his diary, Winston Churchill wrote, "My practice or my career is finished," and then made a kind of an impassioned statement about how his career was finished. That was 1915. 1950, he was convinced that his career was over. So, the twists and turns of the evolution of a practice is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, give me another one. Serve up another conjecture.
Well, I don't know. I've got 2 or 3 here on my list under the general heading of beliefs and assumptions, and in some cases actually myths about practice, mm-hmm. that are conjectures that have to me a richness and certainly a relevance. One in particular that I can get going on, and you may need to interrupt me here because I tend to wax too lengthy on this particular subject, right. Partly because I'm a case of my own problem myself, and that is a tendency to make lists of characteristics of your phenomenon, whether your phenomenon is a leader or a practitioner or a classroom teacher or whoever it is. So you say, what is it? I'll pick the leadership, for example. What is a good leader? And in the field of leadership studies, there are lists and lists and lists of characteristics of good leaders. The point of the conjecture is that practice is not a list. And just because you've made a series of interesting, rather rich observations about the particular practice you're talking about, you have not captured the true essence of the practice and the practitioner's point of view on it. I remember I first discovered this when I was studying Carl Rogers, what he called originally non-directive therapy and later came to call client-centered therapy. I was reading it and really grooving on the many interesting things Rogers says about his clients. And then I realized one time, walking out of class after a particularly stimulating class, I realized that as a budding practitioner of business leadership, I was not going to have the luxury that Rogers had of sitting down in a quiet office with the phone off the hook and nothing else pending, and the ability to focus 100% on the particular client that he had at the moment. And that all those really interesting things that Rogers says, particularly in one of his last books on becoming a person, 1961, I realized that as a budding business leader, I was going to have to behave in a Rogerian, if I was going to behave in a Rogerian fashion and be really accepting and supportive of the person I was listening to, I was going to have to do it on the way out to the parking lot, or in 3 minutes in the elevator, or stop quickly at the end of a meeting and have a quick interaction with somebody. I was not going to have that luxury of the quiet office with the phone off the hook. And yet here was this list of characteristics that had that unstated presumption. So what I always want to say, when you write down a rich list of leadership characteristics, articulates vision, empowers employees, empowers subordinates, challenges the process, all these things that have been said by a number of the most popular leadership writers, that those are all things that are going to have to be done on the way out to the parking lot or in the elevator. And furthermore, they were going to have to be done, if I say they have to be done together so that they interact. And I was just looking at one of the best-selling leadership books that's on the market today that has 5 very attractive characteristics of effective leadership. And that book, nowhere in that book did they ever talk about how the 5 characteristics interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you be both supportive of an employee and challenging of the process by which they're working? How are you going to do that? I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying it's a separate skill from the skill of challenging or supporting. So here you've got 5 or 6 or 7 or however many, 7 habits of highly effective leaders, who knows? But you have to remember that those characteristics are all operating together. They're not in little compartments where you can practice them in a pure fashion. The temptation to make lists, and I do it all the time. We're running these podcasts from a list of conjectures that we have.
That's right.
But we have to remember these conjectures in relation to each other and not as single freestanding thoughts about practice. And we have to keep asking ourselves, what does this conjecture have to do with that conjecture? Mm-hmm. How does this conjecture relate to that conjecture? Remember, we said in this conjecture, blah, blah, blah. But now here we're saying, are we saying the opposite in this other conjecture over here? You've really got to be careful about that. And I don't think there's near enough attention paid to that issue in the field of thinking about effective behavior of any kind. And certainly here with our own focus on the nature of practice. Does that ring any bells with you?
It does. In fact, I think it particularly pertains to the nature of practice. We just spoke a moment ago about the temporal aspect of practice and how time continually changes the circumstances, puts them even in different contexts. So given that, any kind of premeditated thinking about what you're going to emphasize as a trait or a habit is knocked, off. It's knocked off the stage sometime by unanticipated events. So as we're thinking about how to help a practitioner get better or a practitioner herself get better, I think we owe it to both of those roles to go back to that poem that we did a few podcasts ago from Billy, where basically it's not a poem if you pull out 2 lines. It's got to be a whole, and it's intriguing, and I'm scratching my head over it right now about how to deal with it. But you are a great list maker. You've made some really cool lists about the nature of white water. But on the other hand, that list is not white water.
That's right.
Suggestive of what happens when you're in uninterrupted and just destabilizing change. But that isn't a definitive list, even though you published it. Right. And the same as we say about these conjectures, as we're now publishing them. Take them, listen to them, soak them up, but recognize a lot more you can discover about yourself.
Yeah, the list. It just occurs to me. The list is a form of cognition, and it can be a rich form, but you can't stop there. You have to go ahead and to begin to conjecture the system within which those factors reside. And if you don't do that, if you just leave it as a list of 5 or 7 or how many ever interesting things, you don't really have a hold of the phenomenon that you say you're interested in. I wanted to switch over, if I could, here to another characteristic that I think is important to get on this discussion of beliefs and myths and unstated assumptions about practice. One of the deepest, most profound statements that we have in our culture that we've all grown up with is practice makes perfect. And my conjecture is that practice does not make perfect. And in fact, every practitioner I know of who is pretty good at whatever they're a practitioner of is highly conscious of the ways in which their practice is not perfect. And you could almost say practice makes imperfect. I'll take copyright on that one if it's any good. Practice makes
story
imperfect.
of my life.
And
That'll
I
be
get
my
this.
autobiography. That'll be my title.
Well, all these golfers that you love to play and I love to watch, ask any one of them how's their game, and they'll tell you about all the things that are wrong with it, and what they're working about. You know, people like Jack Nicklaus were always talking about how they had to tear their game down and start all over again, and so forth. I don't know how many. It would be fun to make a list of all the golfers who had torn their games down and started all over again. Tiger Woods himself has said that about now that he's got his back in shape. Hopefully, let us hope that he's had to reconstruct his game pretty completely.
So
I don't know enough.
Perfect? Is that what we're saying? After my grandmother told me that, she couldn't be wrong. Practice doesn't make perfect.
Practice makes perfect. Yeah. Right. My mother always used to holler that from the kitchen when I would stop practicing the piano.
Oh, yeah.
Practice makes perfect. Get back at it. Play that scale again.
Mine used to call, don't play anymore. You're driving us crazy. How many times can I listen to Bill Grogan's Goat? Where you hit the wrong key, a different key every time.
Old Hogan's Goat.
Bill Hogan's Goat. You want to say more about practice is not what makes us perfect, or that perfect is not even worth shooting for?
Well, another one, a related one, in fact, is the idea that practice is highly scientific, and frequently there are many practices which are called applied science. You and I have grown up with, in our careers, we've grown up with the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. Mm-hmm. as supposedly a key journal in the field of leadership and organizational behavior. And I don't think, in a strict sense, I don't think practice really is an applied science. And in fact, as I have thought about this in connection with these podcasts, this is a thought that's only about a few hours old in my mind, that the phrase applied science is almost an oxymoron. And the reason I say that is because the discipline and the rigor that goes with science and the structure and the protocols, all the things that we know about how to proceed in a disciplined and orderly way in a process of inquiry, as soon as you engage those standards or those values with a practical problem, they begin to break down immediately, because the problem the practitioner faces isn't a nicely structured scientific problem. Maybe a piece of it is, but the issue overall, the practice overall, is not going to stay pristine for very long. For one thing, as we have said, practice is a temporal process and evolves, and it means that the phenomenon you're engaging is changing itself as time goes on. And scientists, they don't like the phenomenon to change too fast. They want the phenomenon to hold still so that they can theorize about it and have some faith that the theory that they write down today will still be applicable tomorrow morning. And there are lots of phenomena in the field of practice where that is not true. It changes overnight, and tomorrow morning, the conjecture you had yesterday about the issue has become irrelevant or has evolved into something else. So practice is, in my mind, not an applied science. It makes use of pieces of science, certainly. Sometimes, not all practices, many practices, I'm sure, hardly use any scientific knowledge at all. But there's lots of scientific knowledge that goes with making a sailboat go forward. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do to test that proposition, all you have to do is watch the beginning sailor slide gently up onto the rocks as he or she has been unable to make their sailboat go in the direction they wanted it to go. There's lots of science that goes with explaining why that is. But the hand on the tiller and the other hand on the sheet in a small boat, what you're actually doing is not science. What you're doing is integrating a variety of characteristics into a flow of behavior that achieves the objective that you're trying to achieve. Back to our working way of thinking about what a practice is. Mm-hmm. A way of thinking about adapting to the circumstances of the situation. So practice is not an applied science per se, and it's a little bit misleading to think that it is. I wanted to get that into the conversation as a conjecture about practice, so that what you're really emphasizing for a learner, you're really emphasizing to the learner to pay attention to all the ways in which it's not scientific, and that it has a different quality. You know, in the manuscript that you and I are preparing and have been working on for the last few months, I quote Chester Barnard, who says that the executive process, the actual doing of the executive functions that he has spelled out, is a matter of art, not of science. He says that in chapter 15 on the first page of The Functions of the Executive, his famous book. And he says instead it is a matter of, and I love these, as you know, I just love this string of adjectives, that the behavior of perceiving how to act, efficacy at the point of action, the behavior of perceiving how to act is a matter of, quote, feeling, judgment, sense, proportion, balance, appropriateness. Feeling, judgment, sense, proportion, balance, appropriateness. For all I know, he dashed those adjectives off in 5 minutes. For all I know, he meditated on them for 5 years. But they capture so beautifully the essence of effective action in an organizational situation. And it is just not science. It is something else than science. And he says art that may or may not communicate as much as needs to be communicated around the notion. But it's a something that I'm sure generations of learners have struggled to try to get a feel for, well, if it's not science, what is it? And what is it I'm supposed to be learning, and so forth. And if I may, I'd like to insert here a little anecdote that just came to me.
Okay.
Quite by accident, came to me in my email just this week. A young student I know who's a music major in one of the major music schools in the country, working toward a bachelor's degree. And he has the option of a track in the curriculum, a track called performance. And he's quite interested in that because he intends to be a performer. So he says, I just looked at the website for the requirements for the bachelor's degree in performance. And it appears that there are preparation for recital classes starting in the 5th semester. For God's sake, he says. In other words, I think he means they keep you waiting that long before you even begin to talk about performance. But until your final semester at the end of 4 years, it appears there is no requirement to perform in public. It would be, I would be willing to call them up and confirm this if you like. So that is really incredible. How can you be a major in performance and not get any exposure to performing for 4 years?
Well, it
is such a beautiful case of what we're talking about that we think is endemic throughout higher education and throughout professional education, which purports to be training people how to do things.
How to do things, exactly.
I think that's
astounding.
How to be leaders or whatever.
I think it's wonderful that he raises, that he actually has the critical thinking going to look at that and then share it with you. And I'm thinking back on what you just read. It reminds me of our undergraduate management curriculum. They didn't really, in my school and probably most schools, you don't really get to do what they call, like a capstone where you integrate and do something. And we had my friend, Steve Cavallari has a wonderful access to the simulations that he's been using for years. But it's sometime when those simulations occur is the first time that students have had to do any cross-talking. The accounting majors had to talk to the management majors and the marketing majors. And, the gist of it was, this is a little late in the game, isn't it? to be
Yeah.
Now I'm excited about business, but for 4 years, I really wasn't all excited, but I was too deep into it to find something more interesting. Whereas I think you and I would easily agree that business in every form is endlessly fascinating and very challenging and about as much of a sport as you could possibly want for the whole of your life when you're in business. But we kind of postpone that. And I would think being a performer in a music program would be excruciating if all you did for years was observe videos of Pavarotti or Toscanini or some of these other people.
Yeah, right.
And yet we do that, don't we? I mean, we show them cases and pictures of managers and all that and saying, someday. So, yeah, you got me on that one.
Well, I really think it's such a scandal that we have, as educators and trainers, we have not figured out ways of making the practice real for the learner.
That's it. That's the key.
Before they're ready to graduate. And even schools that teach by the case method and intend with their cases for the student to experience real nature of the issues the practitioner faces. Even those types of educational situations are still very, very bounded and very idealized. They're snapshots, not movies that the learner is exposed to. And I can imagine that a number of our listeners are sitting back and saying, you're right, Vaill, but what do you propose to put in the place of all this book learning that you say we've been overemphasizing? And how are you going to take a group of 80 students sitting in a principles of management class and give them any kind of real-time feel for what managing entails? Mm-hmm. How are you going to do that, Vaill? And I have spent my career working on that problem.
You have, as have I.
So have a lot of other members of the profession. Mm-hmm. And there are answers to that question. And maybe we should devote a podcast to some of those answers.
That's my thought as well.
As we go along here, because I vividly remember a history professor that I was sitting in a small group with. We were in a breakout session, and the subject was how to teach. And in the breakout session, we were talking about class participation. And this history professor said, with some wonderment, how do you conduct a conversation on history with 40 juniors when they've never had the subject before? How do you do that? I've never done it. And I said, that's an interesting question to take on. I would like to be that professor with the whole summer to think about how I was going to do that in the fall. So, yeah, let's put that on our list of challenges for conjectures about practice.
We shall. We have just a few more minutes on this time, Peter. Do you want to pop in one more, or shall we do a little bit of summarizing, or both?
Let's see here. What have I got that I thought we ought to spend a little time on? Well, this is not an extended subject, but we went through a phase back in the 90s of what were called best practices.
Yep.
And the idea was that you would shop around as an upper middle level manager. You would shop around for organizations that are doing things that are, let's say, employee appraisal, that have appraisal systems that are you consider to be superior, and you're going to take their appraisal system and you're going to plug it into the way you do things in your organization. And it was quite an exciting idea for a while there. I don't know if it's still has much currency now or not, but it occurred to me at the time that it was really, it's a tricky question. How do you assess the best practices of another organization with the intent of bringing something that they do into your operation? What you have not done is identified the best theory, if I may say, the best theory that underlies the best practice that this other organization has adopted. That is, what is the system of ideas that they used to generate this practice in their organization? That question, my perception was and still is, that question is almost never asked. Don't talk to us about the theory. Talk to us about how you do this. Well,
give us the kit. Just give us the kit.
That's right. That's right. And if you don't pay attention to the best theory that underlies the best practice, the chances are that you're not going to do a very good job of assessing its relevance for your own organization. Because my conjecture is that under or behind every best practice is a best theory or a best system of ideas. I'm thinking, for instance, if people remember W. Edwards Deming and his famous 14 points that was the supposedly the protocol around which you design the work system, whatever the work system is that you're talking about. Well, there were a lot of things about Deming's 14 points that did not get adequately assessed before they were adopted, and therefore a number of the attempts to realize the types of organizations that Deming was promising, though they failed. They failed in my university miserably. And part of the problem anyway was that Deming never really spelled out the package of theoretical ideas that he was in possession of and believed in to generate his 14 practices. And I think that holds true generally. One thing that was never observed was that of 9 of Deming's 14 points were having to do with working on the human organization of the human relationships in the organization that is the target. And so Deming was actually functioning as an organizational behavior specialist. 9 of his 14 points were organizational behavior. They weren't production and operations management at all. And I invite listeners to check that, go back find a copy on your shelf of Deming's book, and you'll see where he talks about his 14 points. 9 of them are about human behavior and leadership and listening and trust. And remember his great mantra, drive out fear.
Drive out fear. That just
drive
crossed my
out
mind.
fear.
Drive out fear.
And
not Fearon, fear. Just remember.
Drive out Fearon, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, so we've really had a really robust 45 minutes to delve into this set of conjectures around myths and untested assumptions, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And I look forward to our next conversation. We have more to come, and we've also added a new conjecture, which is the whole question of how do you organize a system of learning so that for people who are preparing to be in practice, they get to the real, R-E-A-L, sooner than too late, thanks to your potential music student friend. Send along our thanks for that. That was really a cool addition to our conversation. So, last words, Pete?
I conjecture that we're done.
Okay, great. I look forward to our next time. Thank you again for a great experience.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Student to teacher.
You're a co-conspirator here, of course, as you know.
I am, for sure.